On one of those days, millions of people suddenly vanished without a trace on Earth, and the news outlets covered extensively. Disappearances occurred abruptly, yet there had been plenty of warnings. However, top-level politicians flatly deny God's involvement, and everyone else refuses to recall that the Bible had long warned people about the rapture. All kinds of theories are put forward, from alien plots to unexplained natural phenomena. At this time, the oligarch Jonathan Stonegal decides to buy the largest information system, Eden, and build a temple for a new religion, despite the fact that crime rates around the world are rising. One of those who lost his family is pilot Rayford Steele. Left all alone, he remembers how his wife, Irene, tried to guide him to God and even took him to services at the Church of the New Age. But he was in no rush to become a follower. Everything changed when, right in the middle of a flight at an altitude of 9 kilometers, some of his passengers vanished from the plane. That was when he realized at once that the rapture foretold by Irene had taken place. Now Ray misses his wife and son deeply and wants to believe in the rapture. One day, journalist Cameron Buck Williams hosts a broadcast dedicated to the disappearances. Recently, the world has witnessed a spike in violent crime, and experts predict an even worse situation. His guest, Dr. Kincaid, is investigating this pandemic of evil and insists that a second wave of disappearances is coming, something the people were warned about by a computer. But as soon as Buck begins asking awkward questions about exactly where the data came from, the broadcast is cut off. At the same time in his home, Ray admits to his daughter Chloe that he has decided to go back to work. Meanwhile, a furious Buck tries to find out who exactly pulled the plug on his show and goes to see his boss, Steve Plank. On his way, the camera operator stops him and apologizes for what happened, saying he couldn't go against management. Buck reminds Steve that he could simply refuse to allow those who spread fear without attempting to explain its origins onto the show. Many people have lost their loved ones. They need an understanding of what happened, not scare stories. At that moment, Steve's secretary announces an article reporting that Nicolae Carpathia, a former ambassador from Romania, has been appointed the new Secretary General of the UN. But Steve isn't interested. He threatens to cancel Buck's show if Buck doesn't do as he's told. An outraged Buck leaves. Meanwhile, Chloe is remembering her vanished brother, feeling guilty about it. Buck, on the other hand, is watching Nicolae's speech, where he calls on all the world's governments to create a single global state. After that, Buck calls his friend Dirk. Dirk suggests discussing the matter in person, in a secluded spot. Meanwhile, Chloe has a nightmare in which she begs the Lord to let her into the room where her brother is. He shakes his head no, and she keeps knocking on the door in vain. Her father wakes her up. Everyone is having a hard time coping with what happened, but Irene always asks them to think about the future. At this time, Dirk tells Buck that an analytics firm has been giving unverified data to the UN, backing them up with phony survey reports. The truth is, they don't really have any solid information about either the number or identities of those who vanished. Essentially, they're creating a crisis themselves. Dirk shows him a clear diagram of how several corporations control the world. 15 TV channels, 120 stations, 300 newspapers, and even pharmaceutical companies. And among them appears the name Steve Plank, although Buck is sure the TV studio is run by a well-known family of entrepreneurs. Dirk reminds him that no one has ever actually seen this family. Stonegal owns the companies, and for years he's been pushing for a global reset. Buck himself was on a plane during the disappearance, where he met a remarkable young woman. He shows a photo of himself with Chloe. Dirk leads him into a room where he's set up a hiding place. In the official safe, he keeps a password-protected hard drive containing a season of The Simpsons. Later, Chloe goes to meet Buck, who tells her about Dirk's discovery and admits that he doesn't want to be part of it. He really thought he was telling people the truth, only to find out he was just being used. At that moment, everyone's devices receive a message announcing the start of a second wave of disappearances. Buck rushes to the studio, where he again tries to find at least one witness. The guests cite various sources, claiming disappearances could have occurred even in prehistoric times, but there's still no definite proof of the rapture. Buck then suggests that it might be new technologies that are fooling millions of people. Just then, a message arrives about the start of a UN conference at which Stonegal is speaking, calling everyone to come together against a new threat because the Great Reset has begun. Many countries will go bankrupt, while others will sink into poverty. Hence, the UN approves a single payment system, Eden, invented by scientist Rosenzweig, who is freely handing it over for the unified government to use. Buck connects with Stonegal live, and he admits that the first thing needed is to establish peace in the Middle East. Later, Buck points out to Steve that the second wave unfolded exactly as predicted by Dr. Kincaid, who, it turns out, is collaborating with those who advocate for a single government that uses scare tactics about catastrophes. Yet Buck never found anyone who could verify the reality of the second disappearance. 90% of the data came from Stonegal's firm. Steve forbids Buck from telling viewers about his findings. Meanwhile, Ray checks Irene's phone and finds the Bible, but oddly enough, the search engine returns no chapters on the rapture. The Church of New Hope account is blocked, and the pastor's number is missing from the contacts. The man drives to the church building and discovers locked doors and broken windows. Armed with a golf club, Ray enters through the back door and finds the pastor in a trashed sanctuary. At the same time, Chloe is attacked by a thug. She manages to keep hold of her purse, but she gets a cut on her hand in the struggle. Gathering her belongings, Chloe finds a pamphlet from the Church of New Hope, where Ray is currently helping the pastor, who was injured during a raid. The pastor is certain that the disappearance is truly the rapture, so Ray's wife and son are fine. The pastor asks Ray to leave him there so that he can finish his business. Meanwhile, Chloe seeks help from a doctor acquaintance who takes her into an office to treat the cut, then introduces her to a patient preparing to pass away. Ray, for his part, is trying to find a scientific basis for the ascension. The pastor points out his mistake. The Bible speaks of a 7-year peace between Israel and its enemies, and on that day the name of the Antichrist will be revealed, a false Christ who comes to deceive humanity. The pastor admits that he never truly believed it all himself. Thus, he is a false teacher, which the Bible also predicted. He hands Ray a video intended for those who were left behind. Meanwhile, the doctor and her patient try to convince Chloe to believe in the reality of what's happening, since her mother believed with all her heart. Chloe can't understand why then those who were believers are still here. Ray continues listening to a sermon in which the preacher recalls Paul's letter to the Corinthians, where he warned of the ascension and pleaded for belief in the Lord. The pastor joins Ray, who, for the first time, starts praying with real awareness. Meanwhile, Dirk tries to break into Eden's main server, though he doesn't have the password. Suddenly, he receives a text from an unknown person who knows what he's doing and provides him with the password. Dirk logs into the system. Ray's former colleague arrives, hoping to pursue the romance that was beginning between them. She's now going to work at the UN and is ready to put in a good word for Ray, but he refuses. He's certain about the rapture and has accepted Jesus. She leaves, not wanting to hear a word about God. Dirk tells Buck that Eden holds an enormous amount of data, and apparently someone plans to show it to the world. Meanwhile, TV reports that Nikolai Carpathia is arriving at the UN, and he is greeted by a cheering crowd. Buck goes to Dirk, who shows him that besides the financial system, Eden tracks biometrics and social profiling. Whoever controls Eden will control the entire world, even down to basic food purchases. And the person who sent the password is willing to hand over all the data so that Buck can bring it to light. Dirk proposes going on the interview himself so that if he's arrested, Buck can reveal the truth to humanity. Later, the journalist confesses to his assistant that he's found an absolute bombshell, not noticing that one of his colleagues is photographing his materials before she calls management. Meanwhile, Ray tries to persuade Chloe to go to church, but she refuses. The sick woman overhears and demands to be taken to the pastor. At the office, Steve announces that Buck is fired. In the meantime, Ray finds boxes of flyers in the church that explain everything. At that moment, women enter, escorted by Chloe, ready to listen to the pastor. Dirk then points out a line in the code that shows 3 dates: the day of the first disappearance, the start of the second wave, and 3 days later. But the code itself was written long in advance. It turns out that Eden's creator knew everything before the disappearances even started. Buck again tries to locate someone whose loved ones disappeared in the second wave. He asks Dirk to enter 3 names into the system, only to discover those people do not exist. The men head out to meet whoever sent them the password. Buck helps the camera operator load equipment while Dirk arranges the cases inside and notices a ticking bomb in the cabin. He manages to warn his friends. There's an explosion and Dirk dies in the fire. Meanwhile, the pastor, answering Chloe's questions about why those who didn't believe in God have also disappeared, explains that Jesus warned his followers about that too. One has to pray to find the path and protection from disasters, because half of those who remain will die. The pastor shows her Bible verses that speak of the ascension, and suddenly Chloe leaves. At the same time, Stonegal and Rosenzweig ask Carpathia to support their project, but he is confident that everything is already going smoothly without him. At the church, the pastor reminds everyone that Judgment Day will come in the middle of the 7-year period when the Antichrist declares himself God, and the whole world will believe him. Meanwhile, Chloe goes to a cemetery, and Buck goes to Dirk's secret room where he manages to get to Dirk's laptop. Federal agents give chase. Buck is forced to hide in a trash bin. One of the agents, frustrated at losing him, shoots the bin and hits the laptop. In the meantime, Stonegal tells Nikolai that he has chosen him as his successor. Buck gets a message from the camera operator who says federal agents are tearing the studio apart and that Buck's assistant has apparently drowned in her bathtub. Before signing off, the operator assures him that everything happening now was foretold in the Bible. Meanwhile, the doctor asks Ray a few questions. Her husband and his wife were true believers, so why didn't Ray believe back then? He thinks he was simply inattentive and foolish, but now, at last, he has heard Irene. Faith means going to Christ even with your doubts. All you have to do is open the door to the Lord, who is knocking right now. Later, Buck finds Chloe at the grave she has dug for her mother. The two open the coffin and discover only a dress, which is irrefutable proof of the rapture and God's existence. They go to the church where the congregation is gathered, but Buck refuses to believe, while Chloe stands beside her father. The journalist then calls Rosenzweig and tells him everything he's learned about Stonegal, who used Eden for his own purposes by adding spyware. The scientist goes to Nikolai, and Nikolai asks him to bring Buck along. At this point, Ray shows Buck his findings based on Bible study. Buck ridicules these theories, but suddenly notices a phrase that turns out to be Eden's password, and he begins examining Ray's diagram. It turns out that to build Eden's temple, a peaceful settlement for Israel must be reached. Something that would be unrealistic if Stonegal weren't orchestrating it. So that means he's the Antichrist? Buck doesn't believe it. He's seen what Eden contains and understands that whoever owns it will wield power over the entire world. Buck departs, having received a crucifix from Chloe as he leaves. In the morning, Buck meets with Rosenzweig, who explains that he's long dreamed of building a temple on the Temple Mount, which is why he was so delighted by Stonegal's offer. Buck hears about the first 7-year peace agreement and realizes he was wrong. The man asks God for forgiveness and for guidance on the right path. He calls the camera operator and asks for his help. They head to the UN, where Buck announces that Stonegal plans not only to seize all the money in the world, but also to plunge the globe into a technocratic chaos. Hearing this, Nikolai acknowledges that he can reveal what will happen next. An assassin disguised as a security guard will draw a gun and try to kill them all. Just then, Nikolai picks up the pistol himself and shoots Rosenzweig and Stonegal. Everyone else watches the execution in total calm, and Nikolai declares that he must take the reins of power upon himself. Only after that do people seem to snap out of it, and they all insist that the guard was the shooter. The journalist calls on his camera operator for help, and the operator, getting into a car, starts broadcasting the footage Buck is sending from a completely different location. Nikolai begins his press conference, but suddenly the screen cuts over, and Buck delivers the real story, debunking the UN Secretary General's narrative about unexpected disappearances. Agents scramble to find Buck, but only discover his phone after he's already exposed the politician's lies to the world. Buck manages to escape and arrives at an airfield where Ray, Chloe, and the pastor are boarding a plane, taking off over the city. The pastor observes their burgeoning faith, refraining from reminding them that the second coming is still 7 years away. Years that will be the worst in all of human history. The plane flies over the city, releasing numerous pamphlets from the Church of the New Age, which people pick up and read. Yet another movie about a worldwide conspiracy of the elites. And although a few interesting and noteworthy ideas are hinted at, the creators haven't said anything particularly new.